Welcome to Games from Folktales, a podcast that mixes historical research and tabletop role-playing settings. I'm your host, Timothy Ferguson. This is the second last of our episodes of The King of Elflands' Daughter. In this episode, Dunsany is paying off all the folklore that I've discussed in previous episodes, so I don't really need to pop in giving commentary along the way. I would like to note that the Witch Zerondorel expresses a view of magic which turns up in 2nd edition as the underlying philosophy of House Yarburton, and I'd like to thank Michelle Fry and her LibriVox team for this recording.
Chapter 30 of The King of Elflands' Daughter by Lord Dunsany. The Coming of Too Much Magic. In Earl that had sighed for magic, there was indeed magic now. The pigeon loft and old lumber lofts over stables were all full of trolls, the ways were full of their antics, and lights bobbed up and down the street at night long after traffic was home. For the will-o'-the-wisps would go dancing along the gutters and had made their homes round the soft edges of duck ponds and in green-black patches of moss that grew upon oldest thatch. And nothing seemed the same in the old village. And amongst all these magical folk, the magical half of Orion's blood that had slept while he went amongst earthly men, hearing mundane talk each day, stirred out of its sleep and awakened long-sleeping thoughts in his brain. And the elfin horns that he had often heard blowing at evening blew with a meaning now, and blew stronger as though they were nearer. The folk of the village, watching their lord by day, saw his eyes turned away towards Elfland, saw him neglecting the wholesome earthly cares, and at night there came the queer lights and the gibbering of the trolls. A fear settled on Earl. At this time the Parliament took counsel again, 12 grey-beard quaking men that had come to the house of Gnarl when their work was ended at evening, and all the evening was weird with the new magic of Elfland. Every man of them, as he ran from his own warm house on his way to the forge of Gnarl, had seen lights leaping or heard voices gibbering which were of no Christem land. And some had seen shapes prowling which were of no earthly growing, and they feared that all manner of things had slipped through the border of Elfland to come and visit the trolls. They spoke low in their parliament. All told the same tale, a tale of children terrified, a tale of women demanding the old ways again, and as they spoke they eyed window and crevice, none knowing what might come. And Oth said, "Let us folk go to the Lord Orion, as we went to his grandfather in his long red room. Let us say how we sought for magic, and lo, we have magic enough, and let him follow no more after witchery, nor the things that are hidden from man." He listened acutely, standing there amongst his hushed comrade neighbors. Was it goblin voices that mocked him, or was it only echo? Who could say? And almost at once the night all round was hushed again. And Threll said, "Nay, it is too late for that." Threll had seen their lord one evening standing alone on the downs, all motionless and listening to something sounding from Elfland, with his eyes to the east as he listened, and nothing was sounding, not a noise was astir. Yet Orion stood there called by things beyond mortal hearing. "It is too late now," said Threll, and that was the fear of all. Then Guhic rose slowly up and stood by that table. And trolls were gibbering like bats away in their loft, and the pale marsh lights were flickering, and shapes prowled in the dark. The pit-pat of their feet came now and then to the ears of the 12 that were there in that inner room. And Guhic said, "We wished for a little magic." And a gust of gibbering came clear from the trolls. And then they disputed a while as to how much magic they had wished in the olden time, when the grandfather of Orion was lord and earl. But when they came to a plan, this was the plan of Guhic. "If we may not turn our lord Orion," he said, "and his eyes be turned to Elfland, let all our parliament go up the hill to the witch Zerondorel, and put our case to her, and ask for a spell which shall be put against too much magic." And at the name of Zerundarel the 12 took heart again, for they knew that her magic was greater than the magic of flickering lights, and knew there was not a troll or thing of the night but went in fear of her broom. They took heart again, and quaffed Gnarl's heavy mead, and refilled their mugs, and praised Guhik. And late in the night they all rose up together to go back to their homes, and all kept close together as they went, and sang grave old songs to affright the things that they feared, though little the light trolls care, or the will-o'-the-wisps, for the things that are grave to man. And when only one was left, he ran to his house, and the will-o'-the-wisps chased him. When the next day came, they ended their work early, for the Parliament of Earl cared not to be left on the Witches' Hill when night came, or even the gloaming. They met outside Gnarl's forge in the early afternoon, 11 of the Parliament, and they called out Gnarl. And all were wearing the clothes they were wont to wear when they went with the rest to the holy place of the friar, though there was scarcely a soul he had ever cursed that was not blessed by her. And away they went with their old stout staves up the hill. And as soon as they could, they came to the witch's house. And there they found her sitting outside her door, gazing over the valley away, and looking neither older nor younger, nor concerned one way or the other with the coming and going of years. "We be the Parliament of Earl," they said, standing before her all in their graver clothes. "Aye," she said, "you desired magic. Has it come to you yet?" "Truly," they said, "and to spare." "There is more to come," she said. "Mother Witch," said Gnarl, "we are met here to pray you that you will give us a goodly spell, which shall be a charm against magic, so that there be no more of it in the valley, for overmuch has come." "Overmuch?" she said. "Overmuch magic? As though magic were not the spice and essence of life, its ornament and its splendor. By my broom," she said, "I give you no spell against magic." And they thought of the wandering lights, and the scarce-seen gibbering things, and all the strangeness and evil that was come to their valley of Earl, and they besought her again, speaking suavely to her. "Oh, Mother Witch," said Guhik, "there is overmuch magic indeed, and the folk that should tarry in Elfland are all over the border." "It is even so," said Gnarl. "The border is broken, and there will be no end to it. Will-o'-the-wisps should stay in the marshes, and trolls and goblins in Elfland, and we folk should keep to our own folk. This is the thought of us all. For magic, if we desired it somewhat years ago when we were young, pertains to matters that are not for man." She eyed him silently with a cat-like glow increasing in her eyes, and when she neither spoke nor moved, Gnarl besought her again. "Oh, Mother Witch," he said, "will you give us no spell to guard our homes against magic?" "No spell indeed," she hissed. "No spell indeed. By broom and stars and night riding, would you rob earth of her heirloom that has come from the olden time? Would you take her treasure and leave her bare to the scorn of her comrade planets? Poor indeed were we without magic, whereof we are well stored to the envy of darkness and space." She leaned forward from where she sat and stamped her stick, looking up in Gnarl's face with her fierce, unwavering eyes. "I would sooner give you a spell against water, that all the world should thirst, than give you a spell against the song of streams that evening hears faintly over the ridge of a hill, too dim for wakeful ears, a song threading through dreams, whereby we learn of old wars and lost loves of the spirits of rivers. I would sooner give you a spell against bread, that all the world should starve, than give you a spell against the magic of wheat that haunts the golden hollows in moonlight in July, through which in the warm short nights wander how many of whom man knows nothing. I would make you spells against comfort and clothing, food, shelter, and warmth, aye, and will do it sooner than tear from these poor fields of earth that magic that is to them an ample cloak against the chill of space, and a gay raiment against the sneers of nothingness. Go hence To your village go, and you that sought for magic in your youth, but desire it not in your age, know that there is a blindness of spirit which comes from age, more black than the blindness of eye, making a darkness about you, across which nothing may be seen, or felt, or known, or in any way apprehended. And no voice out of that darkness shall conjure me to grant a spell against magic. Hence! And as she said hence, she put her weight on her stick, and was evidently preparing to rise from her seat. And at this great terror came upon all the Parliament, and they noticed at the same moment that evening was drawing in, and all the valley darkening. On this high field where the witches' cabbages grew, some light yet lingered, and listening to her fierce words they had not thought of the hour. But now it was manifestly growing late, and a wind roamed past them that seemed to come over the ridges a little way off from night, and chilled them as it passed, and all the air seemed given over to that very thing against which they sought for a spell. And here they were at this hour, with the witch before them, and she was evidently about to rise. Her eyes were fixed on them. Already she was partly up from her chair. There could be no doubt that before 3 moments were past she would be hobbling amongst them, with her glittering eyes peering in each one's face. They turned and ran down the hill. Chapter 31. The Cursing of Elfin Things. As the Parliament of Earl ran down the hill, they ran into the dusk of evening. Greyly it lit in the valley above the mist from the stream. But with more than the mystery of dusk the air was heavy. Lights blinking early from houses showed that all the folk were home, and the street was deserted by everything that was human, save when with hushed air and almost furtive step they saw their lord Orion like a tall shadow go by, with will-o'-the-wisps behind him, towards the house of the trolls, thinking no earthly thoughts. And the strangeness that had been growing day by day made all the village eerie, so that with short and troubled breath the 12 old men hurried on. And so they came to the holy place of the friar, which lay on the side of the village that was towards the witches' hill, and it was the hour at which he was wont to celebrate, after bird-song, as they named the singing that they sang in the holy place when all the birds were home. But the friar was not within his holy place. He stood in the cold night air on the upper step without it, his face turned towards Elfland. He had on his sacred robe, with its border of purple, and the emblem of gold around his neck. But the door of his holy place was shut, and his back was towards it. They wondered to see him stand thus. And as they wondered, the friar began to intone, clear in the evening, with his eyes away to the east, where already a few of the earliest stars were showing. With his head held high, he spoke as though his voice might pass over the frontier of twilight and be heard by the people of Elfland. "Cursed be all wandering things," he said, "whose place is not upon earth. Cursed be all lights that dwell in fens and in marish places. Their homes are in deeps of the marshes. Let them by no means stir from there until the last day. Let them abide in their place and there await damnation. Cursed be gnomes, trolls, elves, and goblins on land, and all sprites of the water. And fauns be accursed, and such as follow Pan. And all that dwell on the heath, being other than beasts or men. Cursed be fairies, and all tales told of them, and whatever enchants the meadows before the sun is up, and all fables of doubtful authority, and the legends that men hand down from unhallowed times. Cursed be brooms that leave their place by the hearth. Cursed be witches and all manner of witcheries. Cursed be toadstool rings and whatever dances within them, and all strange lights, strange songs, strange shadows, or rumors that hint of them, and all doubtful things of the dusk, and the things that ill-instructed children fear, and old wives' tales, and things done a midsummer nights, all these be accursed with all that leaneth toward Elfland, and all that cometh thence. Never a lane of that village, never a barn, but a will-o'-the-wisp was dancing nimbly above it. The night was gilded with them. But as the good friar spoke, they backed away from his curses, floating further off as though a light wind blew them, and danced again after drifting a little away. This they did both before and behind him, and on either hand, as he stood there upon the steps of his holy place, so that there was a circle of darkness all around him, and beyond that circle shone the lights of the marshes and Elfland. And within the dark circle in which the friar stood making his curses were no unhallowed things, nor were there strangenesses such as come of night, nor whispers from unknown voices, nor sounds of any music blowing here from no haunts of men, but all was orderly and seemly there, and no mysteries troubled the quiet except such as have been justly allowed to man. And beyond that circle whence so much was beaten back by the bright vehemence of the good man's curses, the will-o'-the-wisps rioted, and many a strangeness that poured in that night from Elfland, and goblins held high holiday. For word was gone forth in Elfland that pleasant folk had now their dwelling in Earl, and many a thing of fable, many a monster of myth, had crept through that border of twilight, and had come into Earl to see. And the light and false but friendly will-o'-the-wisps danced in the haunted air and made them welcome. And not only the trolls and the will-o'-the-wisps had lured these folk from their fabled land through the seldom traversed border, but the longings and thoughts of Orion, which by half his lineage were akin to the things of myth and of one race with the monsters of Elfland, were calling to them now. Ever since that day by the frontier when he had hovered between earth and Elfland, he had yearned more and more for his mother, and now, whether he willed it or no, his elfin thoughts were calling their kin that dwelt in the elfish fells. And at that hour when the sound of the horns blew through the frontier of twilight, they had come tumbling after it. For elfin thoughts are as much akin to the creatures that dwell in Elfland as goblins are to trolls. Within the calm and the dark of the good man's curses, the 12 old men stood silent, listening to every word. And the words seemed good to them, and soothing and right, for they were over-weary of magic. But beyond the circle of darkness, amidst the glare of the will-o'-the-wisps, with which all the night flickered, amidst goblin laughter and the unbridled mirth of the trolls, where old legends seemed alive and the fearfulest fables true, amongst all manner of mysteries, queer sounds, queer shapes, and queer shadows, Orion passed with his hounds, eastwards towards Elfland. Chapter 32. Lyrazel Yearns for Earth. In the hall that was built of moonlight, dreams, music, and mirage, Lyrazel knelt on the sparkling floor before her father's throne, and the light of the magical throne shone blue in her eyes, and her eyes flashed back a light that deepened its magic. And kneeling there, she besought a rune of her father. Old days would not let her be. Sweet memories thronged about her. The lawns of Elfland had her love, lawns upon which she had played by the old miraculous flowers before any histories were written here. She loved the sweet soft creatures of myth that moved like magical shadows out of the guardian wood and over enchanted grasses. She loved every fable and song and spell that had made her elfin home, and yet the bells of earth that could not pass the frontier of silence and twilight beat note by note in her brain, and her heart felt the growth of the little earthly flowers as they bloomed or faded or slept in seasons that came not to Elfland. And in those seasons, wasting away as every one went by, she knew that Alveric wandered, knew that Orion lived and grew and changed, and that both, if earth's legend were true, would soon be lost to her forever and ever, when the gates of heaven would shut on both with a golden thud. For between Elfland and heaven is no path, no flight, no way, and neither sends ambassador to the other. She yearned for the bells of earth and the English cowslips, but would not forsake again her mighty father, nor the world that his mind had made. And Alveric came not, nor her boy Orion. Only the sound of Alveric's horn came once, and often strange longings seemed to float in the air, beating vainly back and forth between Orion and her. And the gleaming pillars that held the dome of the roof, or above which it floated, quivered a little with her grief, and shadows of her sorrow flickered and faded in the crystal deep of the walls, for a moment dimming many a color that is unknown in our fields, but making them no less lovely. What could she do who would not cast away magic and leave the home that an ageless day had endeared to her, while centuries were withering like leaves upon earthly shores? What could she do whose heart was yet held by those little tendrils of earth which are strong? Strong enough? And some, translating her bitter need into pitiless earthly words, may say that she wished to be in two places at once. And that was true, and the impossible wish lies on the verge of laughter, and for her was only and wholly a matter for tears. Impossible? Was it impossible? We have to do with magic. She besought a rune of her father, kneeling upon the magic floor in the midmost center of Elfland, and around her arose the pillars, of which only song may say, whose misty bulk was disturbed and troubled by Lyrazel's sorrow. She besought a rune that, wherever they roamed throughout whatever fields of earth, should restore her to Alveric and Orion, bringing them over the border and into the elfin lands, to live in that timeless age that is one long day in Elfland. And with them she prayed might come, for the mighty runes of her father had such power even as this, some garden of earth, or bank where violets lay, or hollow where cowslips waved, to shine in Elfland forever. Like no music heard in any cities of men, or dreamed upon earthly hills, with his elven voice her father answered her. And the ringing words were such as had power to change the shape of the hills of dreams, or to enchant new flowers to blow in fields of faery. "I have no rune," he said, "that has power to pass the frontier, or to lure anything from the mundane fields, be it violets, cowslips, or men, to come through our bulwark of twilight that I have set to guard us against material things. No rune but one, and that the last of the potencies of our realm." And kneeling yet upon the glittering floor, of whose profound translucence song alone shall speak, she prayed him for that one rune, last potency though it be of the awful wonders of Elfland. And he would not squander that rune that lay locked in his treasury, most magical of his powers and last of the three, but held it against the peril of a distant and unknown day, whose light shone just beyond the curve of the ages, too far for the eerie vision even of his foreknowledge. She knew that he had moved Elfland far afield, and swung it back, as tides are swung by the moon, till it lapped at the very edge of the fields of men once more, with its glimmering border touching the tips of the earthly hedges. And she knew that no more than the moon had he used a rare wonder, merely wafting his regions away by a magical gesture. Might he not, she thought, bring Elfland and earth yet nearer, using no rarer magic than is used by the moon at the neap? And so she supplicated him once again, recalling wonders to him that he had wrought, and yet used no rarer spell than a certain wave of his arm. She spoke of the magical orchids that came down once over cliffs, like a sudden roseate foam breaking over the elfin mountains. She spoke of the downy clusters of queer mauve flowers which bloomed in the grass of the dells, and of that glory of blossom that forever guarded the lawns. For all these wonders were his. Bird-song and blooming of flowers alike were his inspirations. If such wonders as song and bloom were wrought by a wave of his hand, surely he might by beckoning bring but a short way from earth some few fields that lay so near to the earthly border. Or surely he might move Elfland a little earthward again, who had lately moved it as far as the turn in the path of the comet, and had brought it again to the edge of the fields of men. "Never," he said, "can any rune but one, or spell or wonder of any magical thing, move our realm one wing's width over the earthly border, or bring anything thence here. And little they know in those fields that even one rune can do it." And still she would scarce believe that those accustomed powers of her wizard sire could not easily bring the things of earth and the wonders of Elfland together. "From those fields," he said, "my spells are all beaten back, my incantations are mute, and my right arm powerless." And when he spoke thus to her of that dread right arm, at last perforce she believed him, and she prayed him again for that ultimate rune, that long-hoarded treasure of Elfland, that potency that had strength to work against the harsh weight of earth. And his thoughts went into the future all alone, peering far down the years. More gladly had a traveller at night in lonely ways given up his lantern than had this elvish king now used his last great spell, and so cast it away, and gone with it into those dubious years, whose dim forms he saw, and many of their events, but not to the end. Easily had she asked for that dread spell, which should appease the only need she had. Easily might he have granted it, were he but human. But his vast wisdom saw so much more of the years to be, that he feared to face them without this last great potency. "Beyond our border," he said, "material things stand fierce and strong and many, and have the power to darken and to increase, for they have wonders too. And when this last potency be used and gone, there remains in all our realm no rune that they dread, and material things will multiply and put the powers in bondage, and we without any rune of which they go in awe shall become no more than a fable. We must yet store this rune." Thus he reasoned with her rather than commanded, though he was the founder and king of all those lands, and all that wandered in them, and of the light in which they shone. And reason in Elfland was no daily thing, but an exotic wonder. With this he sought to soothe her earthward fancies. And Lyrazel made no answer, but only wept, weeping tears of enchanted dew. And all the line of the elfin mountains quivered, as wandering winds will tremble to notes of a violin that have strayed beyond hearing, down the ways of the air. And all the creatures of fable that dwelt in the realm of Elfland felt something strange in their hearts, like the dying away of a song. "Is it not best for Elfland that I do this?" said the king. And still she only wept. And then he sighed and considered the welfare of Elfland again. For Elfland drew its happiness from the calm of that palace which was its centre, and of which only song may tell. And now its spires were troubled, and the light of its walls were dim, and a sorrow was floating from its vaulted doorway all over the fields of faery, and over the dells of dream. If she were happy, Elfland might bask again in that untroubled light and eternal calm, whose radiance blesses all but material things. And though his treasury were open and empty, yet what more were needed then? So he commanded, and the coffer was brought before him by elfin things, and the knight of his guard who had watched over it forever came marching behind them. He opened the coffer with a spell, for it opened to no key, and taking from it an ancient parchment scroll, he rose and read from it while his daughter wept. And the words of the rune as he read were like the notes of a band of violins, all played by masters chosen from many ages, hidden on midsummer's midnight in a wood, with a strange moon shining, the air all full of madness and mystery, and lurking close but invisible, things beyond the wisdom of man. Thus he read that rune, and the powers heard and obeyed it, not alone in Elfland, but over the border of earth.
Your saga may vary.